the road that fed an army before it broke. The truck did not look like a weapon. It had no turret, no cannon, no armor plate thick enough to stop a German round. It did not have the clean violence of a fighter plane or the legend of a Sherman tank breaking through a hedgerow. It was just a 2.5-ton cargo truck, battered by dust, rain, overloading, and men who had not slept enough to remember what day it was. But in the late summer of 1944, the U.S. Army discovered a truth that every empire eventually learns. Victory can move only as far as fuel, food, ammunition, tires, bridges, ports, maps, mechanics, and exhausted drivers can carry it. After the breakout from Normandy, the Allied advance across France looked, from a distance, like a miracle. German lines shattered. Paris was liberated. American armor rolled east. The maps at headquarters began to change faster than clerks could update them. Whole German units seemed to dissolve under air attack, panic, and pursuit. For a brief moment, it appeared as if the war in Western Europe might end before winter. Then the miracle began to outrun itself. Behind the armored columns, Normandy was still a wound. The beaches had served as ports, roads, depots, hospitals, graveyards, and traffic jams all at once. Cherbourg, captured after hard fighting, had been badly damaged by German demolition. Other major ports were still out of Allied reach or unusable. Railways had been bombed deliberately before D-Day to isolate the battlefield, and now those same destroyed rail lines could not carry the supplies needed to exploit victory. The American army was advancing across France, but its stomach remained on the Normandy coast. Every mile east made the problem worse. Tanks drank fuel at a terrifying rate. Artillery consumed shells by the ton. Infantry needed rations, socks, blankets, medical supplies, replacement weapons, batteries, spare parts, and mail. Hospitals needed plasma. Engineers needed explosives and lumber. Aircraft needed gasoline. The front was moving, but the supply system was stretching like wire under pressure. A tank without fuel became a bunker. A rifle without ammunition became a stick. A division without gasoline could win a battle and lose the campaign the next morning. The answer was not elegant. It was not born from genius in a quiet room. It was an emergency measure, built in haste, shaped by desperation, and driven by men who were often treated as invisible. They called it the Red Ball Express. The name came from American railroad slang, where a red ball marked priority freight. In France, it became something rougher and more dangerous. A vast one-way trucking route designed to move supplies from Normandy depots toward the fast-moving armies in the east. Roads were reserved. Civilian traffic was pushed aside. Military police tried to impose order on a continent of broken crossroads, bomb craters, refugees, wrecked vehicles, and convoys running through the night under blackout rules. The Red Ball Express was not a single road. It was a moving system of roads, depots, signs, guards, repair crews, dispatchers, fuel points, and drivers. It lived on improvisation. It also lived on exhaustion. Many of its drivers were Black American soldiers serving in segregated units. Men who carried the weight of a war for democracy while wearing the uniform of a country that denied them equal dignity. They were trusted with the arteries of the campaign, but not with equality inside their own army. Their work was essential, dangerous, and often forgotten beneath the easier mythology of generals and tanks. They drove overloaded trucks across France while the front line ate everything they could deliver. Some had been trained for supply work, some had not. Many were young. Some had barely driven heavy vehicles before the army put them behind the wheel of a loaded truck and told them that if the gasoline did not arrive, the advance would stop. They learned fast because the war did not wait for proper instruction. The roads were bad and the schedules were worse. Convoys moved in long, dark chains, headlights hooded, engines straining, drivers fighting sleep with cigarettes, coffee, fear, and the cold air coming through cracked windshields. The army wanted speed and tonnage. The trucks were pushed past limits they were never meant to endure. Tires shredded, engines overheated, brakes failed on slopes, axles snapped, loads shifted. Drivers nodded off and woke with the road gone strange beneath them. At night, France became a map of shadows. The men drove past ruined villages where windows had no glass, and church towers were broken into jagged silhouettes. They passed civilians who watched them with hunger and hope. They passed columns of prisoners, abandoned German guns, burned vehicles, dead horses, fields torn by bombardment, and signposts that were sometimes missing because war had chewed through language itself. They were told to keep moving. That command sounds simple until it is placed inside reality. Keep moving when the road is cratered. Keep moving when a bridge can take one truck at a time. Keep moving when rain turns shoulders in the mud traps. Keep moving when military police wave you through an intersection and the next sign is gone. Keep moving when a driver ahead brakes too late. Keep moving when your own body begins to betray you. Worse still, the Red Ball drivers were not operating in a calm rear area. The front was fluid. German aircraft were less common than they had been earlier in the war, but the danger had not vanished. Stragglers, mines, sabotage, accidents, and confusion all waited along the roads. The farther the convoys pushed, the more uncertain the boundary became between rear and front. There were no grand speeches in those truck cabs. There was the noise of the engine, the smell of gasoline and sweat, the slap of tires over broken pavement, the rattle of cargo, the tightness in the hands, and the knowledge that somewhere ahead a tank crew was waiting for the fuel that might let them live through tomorrow. The deeper truth was that the U.S. Army in Europe had become a machine of movement so large that its own success threatened to paralyze it. The faster it advanced, the more fuel it needed. The more fuel it consumed, the more trucks had to carry fuel instead of ammunition, food, or other supplies. Every gallon burned by a truck delivering gasoline was a gallon not delivered to a tank. Logistics became a race against mathematics. Commanders understood the danger, but they did not always agree on what it meant. George S. Patton's Third Army wanted fuel to keep driving east. Patton believed momentum could destroy Germany's ability to recover. His armored spearheads had torn across France with stunning speed, and he argued, in effect, that the enemy was wounded and must not be allowed to breathe. Omar Bradley had to balance Patton's demands against the needs of other armies. Dwight Eisenhower faced the larger dilemma: whether to feed a narrow thrust toward Germany or support a broad advance across the front. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery argued for a concentrated push in the north. American commanders had their own priorities. Everyone wanted fuel. No one had enough. This was not merely a disagreement of egos, though ego was never absent. It was a battle over the shape of victory. A gallon of gasoline sent to one army could not be sent to another. A bridge repaired for one route delayed work somewhere else. A truck assigned to one depot vanished from another commander's reach. Strategy was being fought not only in headquarters conferences, but in dispatch yards, repair shops, traffic circles, and muddy roadside halts. The official story of victory often turns commanders into chess players. But in France in 1944, the board itself was burning, the pieces were hungry, and the men carrying the pieces were falling asleep at the wheel. The Red Ball Express began in late August 1944 and soon became one of the largest emergency trucking operations of the war. At its height, thousands of trucks were moving supplies forward day after day. The numbers are impressive, but numbers can hide what they cost. Tons delivered do not show the driver shaking himself awake after another near collision. Miles covered do not show the mechanic lying in mud beneath a truck because the convoy cannot wait until morning. Gallons delivered do not show the racial insult a black soldier might endure after saving the operational life of an army that still treated him as second class. There was a strange moral contradiction at the heart of it. The Red Ball Express helped liberate France, while many of its drivers were denied full freedom at home. They moved the fuel of democracy through Europe inside a segregated military system. They helped defeat fascism while living under the insult of Jim Crow. That contradiction does not diminish their service, it deepens it. A driver could spend the night wrestling a loaded truck through darkness, deliver ammunition to a depot near the front, turn around on too little sleep, and still be treated as part of the background machinery of war. The infantryman would remember the shell that arrived. The tank commander would remember the gasoline. The history book might remember the general who used them. The driver's name often disappeared. Yet without him, the front stopped. The hidden battlefield of the Red Ball was not a line of foxholes, it was friction. Every army fights the enemy. Great armies also fight distance, weather, paperwork, broken engines, bad roads, missing parts, and the lies told by optimistic planning maps. The American advantage in World War II was not only industrial production, it was the ability, under immense strain, to organize movement on a continental scale. But even American abundance had limits. The armies advancing eastward were still dependent on long supply lines stretching back to Normandy. The use of trucks solved one emergency by creating others. Trucks needed fuel, maintenance, replacement tires, spare parts, and drivers. The Red Ball routes suffered from overuse and confusion. Some trucks were overloaded beyond safety. Drivers sometimes ignored speed limits because delay at the front seemed more dangerous than a crash on the road. Military police tried to regulate traffic, but war rewards urgency more often than obedience. In the cab of one Red Ball truck, a young driver might not have known the full strategic debate. He might not have known which general was arguing in which headquarters. He knew the clutch was slipping. He knew the load was too heavy. He knew the road ahead had been marked for priority military traffic. He knew the convoy commander wanted no gaps. He knew that if he stopped too long, someone would shout. He knew that men with rifles and tanks were waiting somewhere beyond the next town. The war reduced grand strategy to a single question: could he keep the truck moving? The German army, battered but not destroyed, was also trying to recover. The retreat across France had been chaotic, but not terminal. German commanders understood that if they could slow the Allied advance, reorganize, and anchor defenses near the German frontier, the war could continue. Time mattered. Every day bought by Allied supply failure was a day Germany could use. That is the part of the story often missed. The Red Ball Express was not merely a convenience. It was an attempt to prevent victory from stalling into opportunity for the enemy. Logistics was not behind the battle, it was inside the battle. By September, the first intoxication of pursuit was fading. American units reached the limits of their supply. Patton's advance slowed for lack of fuel. Other Allied operations competed for resources. The German frontier was no longer a distant idea. It was becoming the next wall. Autumn approached. Rain and cold would soon turn the campaign into something harder, slower, and more punishing. The Red Ball had fed the advance, but it could not permanently overcome the geography of Europe or the destruction left behind by liberation itself. Eventually, ports such as Antwerp would become central to solving the supply problem, though even that would require clearing approaches and restoring usable flow. Rail lines would have to be repaired, pipelines extended, depots reorganized. The truck convoys had bought time, distance, and momentum, but they were never magic. No supply system is. That may be why the story faded. The Red Ball Express did not end with a flag raised over a capital. It did not produce a single photograph that could explain everything. It did not fit easily into the heroic grammar of war films. Its victories were measured in arrival times, gallons delivered, engines repaired, and divisions kept alive one more day. The men who drove it did not storm a beach in the public imagination. They drove from one overburdened depot to another. They waited in lines. They cursed broken parts. They ate cold food. They slept in snatches. They learned to read danger in the behavior of vehicles: a wobbling wheel, a fading engine note, a too fast descent, a driver drifting across the lane. Some died in accidents. Some were wounded. Some returned home to a country eager to celebrate victory, but reluctant to confront the racial injustice embedded in its own wartime institutions. Their contribution remained, for too long, in the shadow of the fighting arms they sustained. But the record of war is not only written by the men who fire, it is written by the men who carry. Behind every armored thrust is a road. Behind every road is a driver. Behind every driver is a supply clerk, a mechanic, an engineer, a military policeman at a crossroads, a dock worker unloading crates, a quartermaster officer trying to guess the impossible, and a soldier whose job is essential precisely because it is rarely remembered. The Red Ball Express reveals something uncomfortable about war. Armies often honor courage most visibly when courage is dramatic. A charge, a last stand, a duel between tanks, a pilot staying with a burning aircraft. But endurance can be courage too. So can repetition. So can returning to the same dangerous road because no one else can deliver what the front requires. In the mythology of 1944, the Allied armies raced across France like history itself had chosen a side. In reality, the race nearly consumed the engine that made it possible. The distance between Normandy and the German border was not conquered only by tanks and infantry. It was crossed by a river of gasoline in 5-gallon cans, by overloaded trucks, by drivers with burning eyes, by men whose names seldom appeared in dispatches, and by an army learning that success could become a crisis if it moved faster than its own lifeline. The road did not look like a battlefield, but it was one. There were no trenches along much of it, no clear enemy line, no single moment when history could point and say, "Here, this is where the outcome changed." Instead, there was a long chain of ordinary movements made under extraordinary pressure. A truck left. A truck arrived. A convoy turned around. A mechanic patched what should have been replaced. A driver climbed back into the cab. Another load went forward. That is how armies survive between battles. That is how victory keeps breathing. The Red Ball Express did not win the war by itself. No honest history should claim that. The defeat of Nazi Germany required infantry, armor, artillery, air power, naval power, industry, intelligence, resistance movements, Soviet sacrifice on a scale almost beyond comprehension, and the combined effort of nations. But in that narrow, dangerous season after Normandy, the Red Ball Express helped keep the American advance from collapsing under its own speed. It turned trucks into arteries and drivers into the pulse of an army. It exposed both the power and the hypocrisy of the nation that built it. It proved that a battlefield can be hidden in plain sight, not because it was secret, but because people prefer to remember the explosion rather than the supply route that made the explosion possible. The war moved east. The convoys changed. The men aged. The maps were folded and filed away. Some drivers went home to applause. Others went home to segregation. Many carried no grand language for what they had done. They had been told to move supplies, and they moved them. They had been told the front depended on them, and it did. History remembered the generals, the tanks, the airborne drops, the beaches, the ruined cities, and the final drive into Germany. But somewhere beneath that memory, in the low growl of an overloaded engine on a dark French road, another truth remains. America did not merely fight its way across France, it was driven there.